Uh, how great is that? The best Thursday evening. So thanks for being here and being part of it. As Felix said, my name is Drew. I'm a senior director of product design at Slack, which is now part of Salesforce. And I've been working at Salesforce for the last 5 years, but I just joined the Slack team late last year. But for tonight, I'm going to be zooming out from all of that, and we're going to be talking more broadly about a career in product design, what I've seen successful product designers do, how we approach complex interaction design problems, and a bunch more. So with your permission, I'm just going to jump right in. Let's see how this is. And first, I should introduce myself quickly. Felix already did that, but I'll go over sort of a zoomed out version of my career path so far. So in college, I interned at Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook twice. I was Facebook's first ever design intern, and I spent close to 6 years there. Saw the design team grow from 7 people to well over 200. I don't even want to know how many they have now. But I left in 2015, and I started my own software company with a good friend. We made 2 apps, a lot of mistakes with the first one. So for the second one, we decided we should get more feedback from people we trust. One of those people was Brett Taylor, who's now the co-CEO of Salesforce, but at the time worked at this company you've surely never heard of called Quip. And he loved our idea, and we ended up joining forces at Salesforce. So I've been here for the last 5 years. It's such a great place to work. I'm super excited to be working on Slack now too. So that's me, but I am not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about design, specifically to try to demystify design. The reason I picked this title is I feel like sometimes my coworkers, engineers, product managers, maybe some of you have experienced this too. They treat design like it's untouchable. If you've ever heard a coworker say, "I'm not a designer," but I think design just feels foreign to a lot of people. And I want to try to break down that myth a little bit today. So, all right, if design isn't magic, what is it? So like any good magician, I think this may call for some audience participation. Now is when everyone who just started zoning out perks back up. Don't worry, I'm not going to call on you, no pressure, but I'd love your help actually, because really I feel like maybe we all know good design already when we see it. So I'd love for you to try to think of an app you love using, or even beyond apps, something in the world, a product, anything really, and try to figure out like, why do you love it? What's it good at? What quality makes it good? And if you're willing to share your thoughts, I'd love to go and chat. You can be very short. What's something about the product that you love that makes it good? Feel free to type that, and I'll see if I can see responses here. See if anyone says anything. Give people a second to think. iPhone. In general, good design isn't noticed. It understands what I want before I think of it. Simplicity, does what I expect it to do. Gets job done fast. These are all great answers. I get exactly what I need done quickly. Usable, efficient, easy to use, invisible, intuitive, delightful. I feel like these are all aspects of great design. Like, thank you for everyone who's participating there. Feel free to keep on adding thoughts, but I feel like this is where perhaps if I am the magician, I reveal the card and it's the same one that you have in your hand. Because let's see if my slides aren't advancing. This is certainly at least 3 tiers to what good design may be. And I think that you kind of touched on all of these examples in the things that you were saying, or maybe you even complemented these things. But for those of you who may be familiar with the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's sort of like an information structure. It's an idea that people need food, water, and shelter at their core, and then you can build on that: health, friendship, achievement, etc. And I feel like design has sort of a similar pyramid. So at the core, if a product solves a problem, like many of you said, like that's the foundation. That's where you start. If something's easy to use, which I think maybe can sit on top of solving a problem and can make something even better, But if it's easy to use and it doesn't solve a problem, it doesn't really help you with something relevant, and it's not going to be compelling. And certainly on top of that too, if something's visually pleasing, delightful, all of these ideas, all three of those things can tie together and really make something truly great. And these ideas might sound simple, but it's amazing how often I feel like people just get confused about these concepts. A lot of startups don't pass perhaps like the visual bar when they first release their first version. And then some people try to use that as a way to say, oh, see, design doesn't matter. And I think it's just not true. It's actually this: if an app is resonating, it's likely solving a problem first. And then as products mature, they tend to improve up the ladder. So if you're inventing a new paradigm, a lot of time you can get away without checking all three of the boxes. But as soon as you start to enter a heavily developed space with lots of competition, that's where you're going to increasingly need to just be executing at a world-class level. And then it's imperative that you're matching customer expectations across all the qualities. So I think there's so many stories. I'm sure, the same way that you can think of products to use that are well designed, I'm sure you can think of many startups that are growing up and honing at the second and third categories as they mature. All right, so I'm starting to make progress on the thesis. Now I want to build on it. We might have to actually approach this from the other angle and ask a magician. Teller, the world famous Penn and Teller, says this: sometimes magic is just someone spending more time on something than anyone else might reasonably expect. So if you're designing a poster, you might explore dozens of variations, as I did with this typography poster from college. If you're designing an app, this is not, there we go. Which, in addition to the two-dimensional element of a static poster, now has the added degree of interaction, you might explore hundreds of variations on how screens fit together in addition to how they look. This video is a 30-second montage by my former coworker, Francis Liu, of a long forgotten social app that never saw the light of day. But I'll take this moment to talk about a personal gripe of mine in the industry. So many people talk about iteration, and in my opinion, not enough people talk about variation. So absolutely, you should design things, study them, test them out, learn from them, improve on them. But not enough credit, I'll just run this again. Not enough credit is given to the age-old idea that's taught in traditional design school, that you should explore multiple ideas up front. It's such a tremendous tactic used by the most successful designers I know. They don't just come up with one idea and say, let's see if it works. They come up with a multitude of ideas and say, what works best? And I think that's a critical insight for junior designers. Make sure you're creating variations, not just iterations. A few years ago, I stumbled into this graphic by a Swiss illustrator named Stefan Schmitz. This guy actually creates tons of illustrations like this one. Each one's almost a throwaway. I think a lot of them sit next to an article, maybe in like The Economist or The Atlantic, and they serve as a visual next to a wall of text. But I saw this one and I immediately loved it, because to me, it's the perfect encapsulation of what design actually is. Design isn't magic. Design is this. There's just so much detail in this illustration that I love that explains the narrative perfectly. So for example, you might notice that with each metaphorical step toward the stage that the juggler took, the more they honed their craft. And importantly, the audience doesn't see any of this. I think that is also what design sometimes seems like, to outsiders, and that can create the perception of magic. The curtain opens and it's perfect. They don't see the broken plates. And if the audience is our customers, we never want to show them the broken plates. But in reality, it's the effort that's hidden behind that that's producing the results. So there's a story of the design of the Citi logo when Citicorp and Travelers Bank merged back in 1998. I don't know if some people were maybe born after that at this stage, but if you've never heard of the designer of this logo, her name is Paula Scher. And I actually really recommend watching the Netflix episode of Abstract, which features her in an episode titled The Art of Design. She's basically a graphic design legend, but as she tells it, when Citicorp and Travelers came to her with their quest for a logo for the new group, she immediately drew it on just a napkin sketch. And she said this of the logo: "It took me a few seconds to draw it, but it took me 34 years to learn how to draw it in a few seconds." She's been juggling a lot of plates over the course of her career. So design isn't magic. Design is trial and error. Design is collaborative process. Design is making sure you're solving a problem first, then making sure it's something easy to use, then making it visually compelling. Design gains more momentum the more you learn, the more you make mistakes, the more you just persist and keep at it. And perhaps most importantly, in the words of Chef Gusteau from Ratatouille, anyone can cook. And by that, of course, I mean anyone can design. Design isn't limited to the few. Design doesn't need to be an exclusive club. If you're willing to put in the commitment, design is for you. You can design. And designers and design ideas alike can start small. In the same spirit as Paula Scher's napkin sketch, here's an example of a quick UI sketch on paper. And sometimes that's where you start. That's where I started. In fact, this is actually a scan of my notebook from when I was 11 years old, if you could believe that. I've been passionate about design and software my whole life, before I even knew design was called design. Some kids play sports, some kids draw detailed menu specs. And if you look closely, you can actually see my real claim to fame here, which is the clothes button. I am currently speaking with Salesforce patent lawyers on this one. I think we've got a good case. No, but in all seriousness, I want to take this opportunity to get back to what a career in product design can be like. It only makes sense to me to share this from a personal perspective. That's what I've experienced. Over the course of my career, I've been lucky enough to work on all kinds of different problems in all kinds of different contexts so far. I'd love to share a few of them quickly as an illustration of real-world examples of different opportunities you can have in design. So in school, I studied traditional graphic design with a bit of interaction work on the side. I was always interested in software, as you just saw, but I learned a lot from studying print and brand and design history. You definitely don't need to go to college studying design to have a career in design. I know even some high school dropouts who are incredible designers that I work with. But for me personally, I'm really happy I had the opportunity, and I'd certainly recommend it to anyone, even if it's not the only way. At Facebook, I was lucky enough to be assigned the Messages product as a new hire. It's actually a bit funny now because I was literally the only designer on all of Messages back in 2009. Today, there's absolutely a team of dozens, if not hundreds of designers on that product. I still can't believe they trusted me as a new hire just out of school, but sometimes that's what happens when you join a company at an earlier stage. And at the time, the greatest contribution I made in terms of product design to Messages was taking what was previously a product that had subject line based threads like email, and literally pitching. PM and engineering had to warm up to this, grouping your messages together so all your conversations were, with one person were in one place. It's funny now because at the time it was so extremely controversial, and today it's just the expectation. When I left Facebook, I mentioned I started my own company. What I didn't say was that our first app was the complete opposite of a social network or productivity software. My co-founder and I made a mobile game called Pinchworm. You used 2-finger gestures to control the worm. So you'd pinch in to jump and you pinch out to dig, and you try to get a high score. We haven't worked on this game in years and years, but I think you can still download it for free on iOS if you want to see it. It was a lot of fun to learn how to make a game, and just a totally different experience. And before I joined Slack, I worked on Salesforce's productivity suite that you may never have heard of, called Quip. It's not the toothbrush, often confused. This one is about collaborative documents and spreadsheets, not dental hygiene. So I talked about trial and error as a critical to the design process, but I think it can also apply to your career path. I personally found so much fulfillment from changing things up every once in a while, putting myself out of my comfort zone and into a totally new domain. If you've been designing a social network for 6 years, try making a worm game. Every time you change contexts, you're a beginner again, and I think that's a really crucial element to staying excited about your work. At least it has been for me. But I've also had many common threads. I've worked on software my whole life, essentially, and I still think it's great. I keep learning new things. To me, software is fascinating in large part because of the degree of interaction. Compared with static print design, interaction provides so many opportunities. Here's an example of what I mean. The most basic example, the desktop menu. This is one of those Xerox PARC inventions that Apple brought to market in 1984. Not new stuff anymore, ancient history. But recently I was reflecting on the self-documenting nature of menus like this. It's kind of cool how someone who is unfamiliar with the functionality of a given app can sort of read this thing like a map to see what's available. And you can always go find something in the menu, but then they also have this built-in mechanism to help you be more efficient if you want, the listed keyboard shortcut on the right. You're like, Drew, I know how to use a menu. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Okay, but I actually got to thinking about this because one of the things I studied in school was about visual proximity. You're quote unquote supposed to group like things together for readability. And I was looking at this menu and going, wait, is this poorly designed? It's sort of strange visually. Cut, copy, and paste are closer together than the corresponding keyboard shortcuts. Is this confusing? To illustrate what I mean, it's almost like this. You're supposed to read the menu left to right, but all the space in the middle might confuse your brain. Suddenly it looks like it says, hello, how you? So what's going on? How can this tried and true pattern of a menu, it's been like this for decades, have this glaring error? Are there ways to fix this? Should there be some kind of connecting component that helps group and label the keyboard shortcut? Should each row have its own divider and then have the sections have thicker dividers? And then it occurred to me, menus aren't broken because I almost forgot the most important ingredient, interaction. Of course, when you hover over a menu item, the row highlights. That's why this design is okay. That's why it works. And that's the reason to me that working on software can be so fascinating. The added component of interaction changes everything. It applies to menus, but it also applies to so much more. Thanks to interaction, you never need to fit everything on one screen. You can use interaction to make information progressively disclose. Here's another example of how interaction design makes design fun and how it can be elusively more difficult to design something well than you might think at first. So for this example, it's a totally made up problem. Let's say you're working on an app that needs to ask your birthday. Could have been a mobile context. In this case, I'm looking at a desktop. Very simple UI. I've just designed this, right? Done. You need to ask for someone's birthday. You use a text field, they type it in, they hit continue, done. All right, well, we should test this and see how does it hold up. What if the user types this? We hadn't thought of this. The engineer didn't expect this. The app crashes. Is it the user's fault? It's never the user's fault. We have to think about these things and design and build robust software. Okay, so we get smarter. We suggest a format. We split up the fields, 2 characters. We tell the engineer, accept only numbers. How about this input? Is this last year or 101 years ago? People live to 101 now. Your savvy grandparent is signing up for my app. All right, 4 digits. We're making progress. Let's pretend we're using this. Something you critically need to do when you're designing software. Keep approaching it with fresh eyes. Try to forget what you know and put yourself in the shoes of the customer. So we start typing, we follow the format. 01, now what happens? Do we auto advance the field? Do we just emit a beep sound if they don't hit tab and keep typing? If we do auto advance, what happens if they hit delete because they typed the wrong second digit? Do we wire this thing up so pressing delete actually shift tabs back to the first field? If so, you better talk to the engineer about that because that's not normal behavior. And if we do auto advance, what happens if the user doesn't realize that they did that and they hit tab themselves? Now the cursor's in the year field by accident. They might be thinking they're typing the date. And also typing 01 is sort of optimistic behavior. If their birthday's in January and they just type 1, we wouldn't be able to auto advance because we don't know if they're about to type another 1 or 2, or if that's the whole thing. So if they hit 1, they type 1 and hit tab, are we going to standardize the data and add the 0 prefix? There's so much to consider here and communicate to engineering. There's a lot of plates that we're juggling here. So maybe we go back to the drawing board, the juggling board, with these separate fields. What if we have one big fancy field that maintains a placeholder as you type? The engineers are going to grumble. Now we're suggesting custom JavaScript, but this could work. We still better think about data validation. So what constitutes a valid entry? The year has to be 2022 or less, since you can't be born in the future. The date has to be between 1 and 31. The month has to be between 1 and 12. But if it's the current year, then the month can't be later than March, and the date can't be later than today. And February 31st isn't allowed. And we do need to think about leap years. Wow, what just happened? We were designing something so basic. How did it get so complicated? So these are those plates again. And maybe you see it as a frustration. Why can't we just solve it right away? But if we embrace the mentality of the juggler, if you embrace the trial and error and exploration, I think you might just find, hey, this is actually sort of fun. Solving problems can be rewarding. And you don't have to do it alone. In fact, some of the considerations, even in that example, involved working with an engineer. There were pitfalls in both the user experience and also some of the proposals technically. Some of the things are easier to make than others, and some things are easier to use than others. And the two don't always align. You have to work together with an engineer to solve the full puzzle. Enter the product team. In our day-to-day work, a product designer joins a software engineer and a product manager to form an EPD team or a PDE team, or whatever your company calls this. But these roles bring different strengths to the table, and most software companies hire for at least these roles and sometimes others alongside them too, like research or content strategy. So how should you think about these roles? How should you work together? What is each person responsible for and not responsible for? Here is an overly simplistic take. To illustrate the basics, engineers are obviously responsible for building the product, but they also have decision-making authority. And importantly, when it comes to critical questions like, will this solution scale? Engineers are always going to weigh in, even on the design. A product manager or PM is in some ways the glue between design and engineering. They're most often accountable to management on the business case for a given project. They're always going to care about the schedule, the prioritization of tasks. The best PMs fill in the blanks on a product team. The not best PMs try to do everything themselves. And of course, on design, like the other roles, there are many responsibilities, but perhaps the most core of them time and time again is advocating for the user experience. While engineers are often looking inward, what can we do? Designers are often looking outward, what should we do? And then there are many topics where there's no one owner. The team collectively shares responsibility for so many things. I'd really encourage product designers to stay engaged on these topics. Don't just defer. Design can and should have an opinion and a seat at the table. It may even be up to you to make sure they do. Which brings me to a critical point. Oh, am I going backwards? In the same way, many people feel design is magic. When they think, many people, when they think about design, think, oh, that's how it looks. And it's really important, at least in my view, to make sure that at your organization, design is also how it works. There are terms for this even. Whether these skills are in 2 roles or 1 role, a fully functioning design team needs to be working at both. And there's a third aspirational component to an effective designer or design team as well, and that's strategy. In addition to making a given task look and act well, What was the task in the first place? Why was that the right task? What's the business or customer value of doing X or Y next? The most effective and senior designers master this skill in addition to the others. And while we're talking about effective designers, in my experience, there may be one behavior above all that I think separates the successful from the frustrated. Designers who embrace a my way or the highway approach on a team just don't get the same results. The best designers strive to visualize the team's ideas, to guide that process, to work as the conductor. And when you combine that insight with variations, not iterations, that's when the, dare I say, magic really starts. Instead of saying no to ridiculous ideas from your PM or CEO, not that our CEO has ever had a ridiculous idea, of course, take a page out of improv class and say yes and. Mock up their solution and mock up alternatives. Don't get attached to, quote, your solution. They're visualize and talk about the trade-offs of all versions. They're all your versions. No matter what the team selects, you're there, faithfully guiding the process and leading the team towards success. Similarly, there's a real temptation to want to dismiss engineers as being out of touch with customers. Don't fall into this trap where you develop an us versus them relationship with your engineering partners. You need them on your team. No one will judge how perfect your Figma mockup was. If it's not built into the product, it never happened. Designers who find ways to build bridges with engineers are more successful 100% of the time. And I don't think there are shortcuts to any of this. It can all work together. Try lots of things. Partner with your cross-functional peers. Don't assume you have the answers, but be there, engaged, optimistic, framing decisions up with visuals. That's certainly how I've seen the best designers work, and I know you can too. All right, one last thought here as a bonus. And I think it's more relevant with each year. So when I was in school, I naively thought design was always a force for good. After all, isn't design about making something easier to use? And unfortunately, the world isn't always good. Dark patterns exist. At my former employer, at one point we were working on a flow that encouraged you to turn on photo syncing from your phone. A senior product leader encouraged us to frame the questions to users not as, do you want to turn this on? But rather, do you want to turn this on only when you're on Wi-Fi or also when you're on cellular? So while I don't have a crystal ball, this isn't magic after all, if you remember. I guess my message to designers would be, keep fighting the good fight. I think this is an area where design has an opportunity once again to be an advocate for the customer, and some businesses need those advocates and voices louder than others, especially in 2022. So that's it. That's what I had prepared today. I know it was sort of wide-ranging. I tried to offer some food for thought about product design, framed up a narrative for what design maybe is and maybe isn't, talked about how and why design is exciting and sometimes complex, encouraged you to be the plate juggler. I love design. I love working with designers every day. I feel like I'm still learning so much about how to be a better designer. And I'm excited that you're clearly interested in learning too, or else you wouldn't still be here. So thanks again. I really enjoyed this and I hope you did as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Drew. That was such a beautiful presentation. I felt really peaceful at it. So thank you. So for now, Drew, if you allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, let me stop.
We will be moving into the Q&A. So we have a couple of questions on Pigeonhole. So if anyone wants to be upvoting your question, please do head over to Pigeonhole.
Oh my gosh.
All right. We do have a lot of questions, but let's get to the ones that are voted first. Okay, this is the first question by Swo Doge. Do you feel pressured working on a product as popular as Slack? Do you ever feel like the blame will be on your shoulders if the launch doesn't go as smoothly?
Interesting. So I feel like I wouldn't say pressure is the right word. I feel like we have a responsibility. I feel like we owe it to our customers to make sure that our product is usable for all definitions of usable. And I feel like that's what we try to do our best every day. I think that thankfully, Slack, Salesforce, I think every company that I've truly worked for has a tremendous culture. These tech companies have realized you don't need to punish people for making honest mistakes. Especially I think at the early days of Facebook, there were a lot of mistakes made. And I never saw the company punish individuals. I think that, making mistakes and learning things is part of the process. We just try to do our best and make things better as time goes. So I certainly feel a responsibility, but I wouldn't say pressure. It's not like there's people yelling at us that things need to be better. I think that we always feel it comes from us. Like we feel we really want to make things better as quickly as we can.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Drew. Okay. The next question is from Allison, and has 3 votes. What frameworks are there for discussing trade-offs with the engineering, product manager, and design team?
That's a good question. I assume this is maybe like thought frameworks. I feel like I'm probably not qualified enough to give a great answer here. I'm trying to think what designers that I respect have done here traditionally. I feel like there may be a number of things you can do when you're assessing a design that can help you sort of frame that up for yourself. One thing that you're probably familiar with, for example, is competitive analysis. So that means it's a fancy set of 2 words for literally trying other people's stuff. So if, so many things that we do are not reinventing the wheel. There are no close button. So a lot of times you actually want to match customers' expectations with something that's sort of table stakes. So being able to use other people, and that can, it can be a big idea, like how do we structure a layout or like structure a flow? And it could even be a pretty narrowly scoped idea. A designer today was talking about internally in my workday about accessibility patterns and the importance of honoring, for example, if you're creating a video player, it's just so important to make sure when you're looking at like the tab order and such, and the way the volume control interacts, compared that to how industry leaders like YouTube are having their controls work for accessibility, because screen reader users are going to really value the consistency that you have there. And I think that just using your intuition, using analysis, you can sometimes put a product or an idea or a mock-up or a prototype in front of a real customer if you have it, always the best, but even just a coworker, or even really try to embrace that mentality of looking at something with fresh eyes and talking about, okay, well, maybe this design puts more on one screen, and so it's good at being a efficient tool for power users, and maybe this flow stretches out functionality over a couple screens, so it may actually be easier to use initially, but then as if someone is doing this task repetitively, it may take a little bit longer to complete the task. And there's never going to be one solution of like, oh, okay, always it's going to be the answer of put things on one screen, or always it's going to be the answer of split things out. It's always going to be contextual based on the problems you're trying to solve, based on your customers' needs.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Drew. Let's move on to the next question. 4 votes on what advice would you give grad students trying to break in the industry to get jobs or internships?
Yeah, I think that there's more and more demand than there ever has been to be product design intern roles, new grad roles. It's really exciting. On the other side of it, I feel like, I talk to so many prospective interns, prospective new grads, and I'm just so impressed at how far the industry has come. Things like portfolios, which I feel like we never really knew what was a good idea. Now it seems like everyone seems to like magically understand what a good portfolio looks like, and I think maybe they've applied competitive analysis to that as well. And I mean, a lot of it is just amazing because there's so many things before where someone wouldn't frame up, for example, oh, what was the team like? What was the length of the project? And now it's like that project metadata and portfolios seems like it's just always present on every junior designer's portfolio I've ever seen. But I mean, I think that the answer to the question of what's the best advice is try to get an intern, try to get internship, get an experience in some way. If you can't get something at a startup, a larger company, a more traditional role, the thing that I think is kind of amazing about the field of design is that you can apply design thinking and design process to literally any problem. We actually hired someone who she was working a full-time job in her regular job, but she felt like she wasn't getting the right kind of design process work through her job. So on the side of work, she decided to just design her own app. She wasn't an engineer or anything, but she just followed sort of the best practices of design. So she made an improved version of a transit app for Caltrain, which is the public transit system here in California. And the thing that really impressed us in her interview was she literally like did drawings, printed them out, took them to the Caltrain station, stopped people on the street, handed them to them, asked them if they'd take a second and like tap through and give her interaction feedback. And I feel like that kind of initiative just looks so impressive. Like just because she wasn't able to, in the regular course of her work, get the kind of like portfolio piece she wanted, she just through sheer will and not being afraid of anything, just made that happen for herself. And it doesn't matter to so many hiring managers if you are really working at one of these large software companies, or if you just are applying process to your own arbitrary problem that is well scoped, and we can see that you have tremendous design process. We can see that you're solving problems. You can see that you're making trade-offs and making discussions. So I think there are always ways to try to get creative if you're having trouble.
Awesome. And Drew, I really love that example. It almost goes to show that at some point, what you're willing to do for the things for the problem that you're solving, essentially people look at that aspect as well, which is many times, we see that, in terms of hiring managers sharing that. So thanks for highlighting that. All right. Wow, we have a 6 vote on any advice on imposter syndrome as a product designer. I feel like we go through this question most of the time, but we are always getting different perspectives. So yeah, Drew, you can share yours. Go for it.
I mean, I'd be really curious what other people said. They probably have better answers than me on this, but I feel like at some point in your career, everyone feels like this. It's also funny because maybe at some point in your career, you feel like, how am I the only person who actually gets this? And sometimes those feelings oscillate and move around. And as you change things up, you go from immediately one to the other. And of course, it's like it's never as bad as you think it is. It's never as good as you think it is. It's one of those. I mean, if you are at a company, if you've been hired for a role, other people felt like you should be there. There are so many needs for product designers these days. And as a result, there are so many product designers and there are so many amazing people to learn from and to mentor and to be on all sides of that. And, I think you do belong, to my side about anyone can cook, anyone can design. Like I deeply feel that. I feel like if you are there investing the effort, put aside thoughts that maybe I don't deserve this. I think you do.
Thanks so much for that, Drew. All right, we will be closing with the last question, and that is 8 votes. It's by Cornelis.
Yeah, that's a good one.
How many variations is too many? When do you know you've had enough variations to discuss with other stakeholders? I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah, this is a great question because I think that there are different aspects to this question. I think, for example, how many variations should you explore yourself? And the answer should probably be more than you share. There was a designer that I really respected back when I worked at Facebook who would bring her work to critique, and she would show the 2 best flows And she talked about the trade-offs that were really kind of strategic trade-offs. They weren't just like, oh, I put the buttons here, I put the buttons here. They were two entirely different takes on solving the same problem. And some people in the room, like one person said, well, what if the notification came from the bottom instead of the top? And she said, oh, I've thought of that actually. And she dragged onto the screen her prototype video of the notification coming from the bottom instead of the top. And she's like, well, that's not as good because in this case, it blocks this component. And she dragged it off the screen.